Good morning. I'm now going to work through problem 6A on the semester exam review. The problem is asking us to factor 20x cubed minus 14x squared minus 24x. Remember that the first question that you ask yourself on every factoring problem is, does a problem have a GCF? And this one does. In 20, 14, and 24, the common number is 2. And in x cubed, x squared, and x, I have a common x. So I'm going to factor those out, which means divide them out of each of the terms. 20 divided by 2 is 10. X cubed divided by x is x squared. Remember, you subtract exponents when you're dividing. Bring down the minus. 14 divided by 2 is 7. And x squared divided by x is x. Again, I subtracted those exponents. Minus 24 divided by 2 is 12, and x divided by x cancels out. And now I have a remaining 10x squared minus 7x minus 12 that I still have to factor. It's a trinomial, meaning 3 terms, and the way that we factor a trinomial is using the AC method when I have a leading coefficient. So I'm going to multiply 10 by negative 12, and that gives me, I'm going to write it in the form of a T-chart as I'm looking for my numbers. That gives me negative 120. Hopefully you can read that, negative 120. And then the numbers that I choose have to add up to negative 7. So they have to multiply to negative 120 and add up to negative 7. Okay, I've already factored 120 because I knew it was going to be a big number and we'd have a lot of factors to look at. So I'm trying to decide what set of two factors again multiplies to negative 120, adds to negative 7. So if it doesn't just come to mind, start looking at the numbers you have available. I've prime factored it, so those are the factors I have available. And I'm going to start with multiplying the first two. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6 times 5 is 30. Would 4 and 30 in any way add up to negative 7? No. So I'll try the first three. I have 2 times 2 is 4 times 2 is 8 times the 15 here, 8 and 15. Is there some combination of those that would add up to negative 7? The answer to that is yes. An 8 and a 15, if I subtract them, will subtract to a 7, and now I've got to decide how to make them positive and negative. My two numbers are multiplying to a negative. That tells me that one's going to be positive and one's going to be negative. That's the only way to multiply to a negative. Again, one is positive, one is negative. And they have to add to a negative, which tells me the bigger one had to be the negative one. So I have 8 and negative 15. Those are my two numbers. So now I'm going to do this middle part by grouping. So I'm going to write 10x squared. Whoops. And I'm going to put minus 15x plus 8x minus 12. And of course, I still have out in front the 2x. When you factor out a GCF, you don't want to lose it. So now, this now has 4 terms in it, and when we have 4 terms, we use grouping. So I'm going to group the first two alike. So I'm going to rewrite my 2x so I don't lose it. Whoops. Put a bracket. What's alike between 10x squared and 15x is 5x. So I'm going to factor that out. And when I factor 5 out of 10, I get 2. And x squared divided by x is x. Minus 15 divided by 5 is 3. X divided by x cancels. So now remember, when you're doing grouping, you want, after you factor the GCF out of those two, to have this in your second set of parentheses. I have a negative sign here and I have a negative sign here, and that tells me that what I need to factor out of these two is a positive. So I look at 8x and 12, and what's in common to those is a positive 4. So I write plus 4. And now factor it out. 8x divided by 4 gives me 2x minus 12 divided by 4 gives me 3. And in fact, I ended up with the same thing in both parentheses, which of course is your goal in grouping. So now come down and rewrite my 2x here. My first set of parentheses is going to have my common factor from, I remember this term and this term now. Whoops, forgot my bracket there. My common factor is 2x minus 3. and what was left was the 5x plus 4. That goes in my second set of parentheses, 5x plus 4, and there you go. I have finished factoring it. Before I made that decision that I'd finished factoring it, of course, I looked in this parentheses. I had two terms. I checked to see if it was a difference of squares. Of course it wasn't. That's the only thing I'm looking for on two terms, a difference of squares or a sum or difference of cubes. And again, don't have that there, and that tells me that 2x times the quantity 2x minus 3 times the quantity 5x plus 4 is the fully factored form of that original trinomial.